Hi everyone, I'm Kirsten Deane and I'm the Campaign Director for Every Australian Counts. We're really lucky today. We're joined by Australia's newest Senator, Senator Jordon Steele-John. Jordon is replacing former Senator Scott Ludlam in the Senate. And so we're really lucky to have Jordon joining us here today, and we're going to have the chance to ask him a few questions, including some of the ones that you've asked on Facebook. So Jordon, tell us a little bit about your first week in the Senate.
Well, it's been, hi everybody, and thanks so much for taking the time for tuning in. It has been a crazy first week. I don't think many people enter under the kind of circumstances that I did. You get sworn in, then we voted on the election of the president because the president had to resign because dual citizenship is a thing, and then we moved on to the marriage equality legislation. So we've had a massive week here, and that's without even getting into the different kind of access changes and procedural changes that we've been working with the staff here at APH to achieve. So it's full on, it's hectic, but I'm really feeling good about how it's gone so far, and excited about continuing to bring the different perspectives into the place.
Yeah, so we've seen some photos of some of those changes that they've made to Parliament House and the Senate. Have you been down that dodgy ramp yet?
Well, I can give everybody a bit of comfort because I did see on my personal Facebook account that a lot of people were quite rightly calling out that ramp for not being up to standard, but that actually wasn't a permanent fixture. That was just for the ceremony of the swearing in, because the ceremony dictates that you enter in a certain way behind the usher of the black rod and then approach the Governor General and that kind of thing. So quite hilariously though, they discovered when a former senator had an accident and needed a motor scooter, that in 1988 when this place was built, they actually fitted a kind of pneumatic moving stair piece of equipment, which they've never used until then. Have no idea how to replace the parts, or how, when I was talking to the clerk of the Senate, he said for all we know there could be an intergenerational family down there kind of working pulleys and levers that we've forgotten about. So that's there if I ever do need to get down onto the floor of the chamber. But no, that ramp isn't permanent, and if it had been permanent, I would have had some words with them, because people were quite right, it's not up to standard.
Good, I'm really glad to hear that. So in a recent interview, you described yourself as a massive political nerd. How did you first get interested in politics?
Well, I can assure you my younger brother Harry's called me worse than that, I can tell you that. But I don't know, I've always had a desire to make a positive difference, as for really as long as I can remember. I traced my first political memory back to the Tampa crisis in 2001, when I was 6 years old. And of course, as a 6-year-old, you don't understand the complex kind of machinations of that whole thing. But I did understand, because we were taught as kids that if somebody's in need, you help them. And I was really clear that we just simply weren't doing that. And that always really stayed with me as an example of kind of the impact that politics can have in people's lives. Now, I'm not going to say, I then started watching Question Time at the age of 6 or Late Line. I am weird. I'm not that weird, thank God. But I don't know, that stayed with me. And then after I'd done the whole astronaut, paleontologist kind of thing, in my early teen years, I don't know, the election of Obama really showed me that political involvement could drive change. And then the refugee issue kind of reared its head again. And that got me thinking about about the impact of politics again. I kind of looked around for a party that reflected my views and values, and found the Greens, and particularly also their focus on social justice issues, because we're very well known for environmental issues, and there is a fundamentally interconnected nature of the environmental and the social. They're not separate. We all extraordinarily strong on social justice issues, and my mother was a social worker in the UK. So we were always a very kind of social justice family. So that all came together. I joined the Greens, and I haven't really looked back since.
So now that you're a senator, what are going to be the most important issues for you?
Well, I think, look, as the youngest person ever to enter the Senate, and one of the few people with a disability to do that also, I'm really keen to bring those perspectives into the place. I don't think that necessarily means that, you know, you have to kind of pigeonhole yourself to either youth or disability, because ultimately, through those prisms, some of the most important issues for everybody in our community can be viewed with clarity. But having said that, particularly on youth issues, it is so clear to me that people of my generation are not getting what we need or deserve from our parliament, that we need, in a sense, a new deal for my generation on climate, on housing, on education, on unemployment. And I'm really keen to work to make that happen. And also on the NDIS, I think it is one of the most important social and economic reforms of the last 30 years. The work that the Every Australian Counts campaign put into making it happen, people over decades fighting to make it happen. It's transformational. It's not a silver bullet, but it must be realised in full. And you know, it's very easy for politicians to sit and wax lyrical about the wonderful nature of the incredible, wonderful people of the Every Australian Counts campaign, and how excellent the NDIS, how we must all support it, and all this kind of thing. And half of them forget that they weren't really that hot on the idea when it first came up, but they kind of, again, thanks to your work, have come along on the journey. But what we can't then allow that to be a cover for, and this is what concerns me, is a retraction of support or an abdication of leadership in other areas that are really important to the advancement of people with a disability. So I'm keen to talk about the NDIS, to fight for the full realisation of that, but also to make sure that the conversation more broadly about human rights in relation to disability stays beyond the NDIS as well.
Right. So you've talked a little bit about this, but why do you think it's so important that we get the NDIS right?
I mean, fundamentally, you've got to think about the system we had before and the proposal under the NDIS are really the realisation of two starkly different conceptions of the role of people with disability in society and what our rights are as fellow Australians. The old model has its history, its genesis, and many of its workings designed around a charitable idea in relation to people with a disability. You know, we are people to be in many ways pitied or empathized with or taken care of. And so people out of the goodness of their hearts will, you know, give a little bit so that we can get a piece of equipment or a service or whatever. But if that service or equipment does not meet the need, then we really shouldn't complain because we're lucky to be getting anything. And that's the mindset which was so damaging about the old system. Now, the proposal fundamental to the NDIS is a shift from that, from charitable gifts given out of the goodness of one's heart to human rights recognised under law and given action to through governmental legislation. It says that we are equal people and that we deserve the opportunity. It is our right to have the opportunity to live fulfilling and productive lives on our own terms, at our own pace, and with our own goals. And that is really fundamental, and that's why it is so important. And that's also, I think, why we see so many challenges with the actual rollout in practice, why there have been so many bumps in the road, because there's a fundamentally different idea at the heart of the NDIS than there is at the heart of many other social welfare provision programs in Australia. It isn't about penny pinching and cost cutting and and the rest of it. This is about meeting unmet need as a recognition of fundamental human rights that are currently being denied. And yet the same people are implementing that. But I really do have to give credit in this space to my colleague, Senator Seward, who has been the Greens disability spokesperson for the Greens for the last 10 years, I think. Her work in engaging with the sector, making sure lived experience is valued, making sure that the problems are flagged, have so far resulted in so much more of a stronger system. And I am looking forward so much to building on her work and of the work that she's done with other people as well.
So what do you think are the biggest challenges for the NDIS? And what do you think that you can do in Parliament, or all parliamentarians generally? What do you think could be done about it?
I mean, look, one of the fundamental things, and we're dealing with it a bit at the moment, is that there is an idea, again, that kind of hides underneath the high rhetoric that many people use around the NDIS, that simply because it exists, we will no longer have to fund things like individual and systemic advocacy services at a state level. And that's a real danger, because individual and systemic advocacy is the way in which we as a community make sure that our voices are heard, and also that systemic problems beyond the remit of the NDIS are flagged. And I'm particularly concerned, and I know the Greens are particularly concerned by the unfolding situation in New South Wales around advocacy funding. So that's a real concern for me, that the kind of people might try and Trojan horse it, again, to either to shift their responsibility, to abdicate their leadership positions, or kind of shift their cost line items or whatever. That's a real concern. I think another concern is, again, fundamentally what we have here is a culture shift. In the passage of the NDIS is a recognition that where there is unmet need, that need must be met as a recognition of people's fundamental rights. And what has concerned me in the past is the approach of, for instance, finding in the psychosocial area of disability that, for instance, trial sites revealed more need than was expected. And the reaction from the government was, well, okay, how do we tighten the criteria? Because we only budgeted for X amount of people, rather than recognizing that early intervention, particularly in the area of psychosocial disability, can be so much more beneficial in the long term. So those are the kind of things that worry me. I'm really keen in the weeks ahead to do more kind of in-depth engagement with the stakeholders in this space. I think another thing that's really important to recognise about disability is that it isn't a kind of homogenous thing. Like I sit here as somebody with cerebral palsy, and I can bring the lived experience and the perspective of myself into the chamber, and also the community I'm from. And I recognise, because I've experienced it in my life, the importance of elevating that lived experience and making sure that those things which people simply do not see are put on people's radar. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I am the best person qualified to speak off the cuff without any information on areas of disability of which I don't have an experience myself. So I am fully aware of that. I see myself as representative of the disability community, but not a direct representative, if that makes sense. I can't speak on behalf of all people with a disability any more than anybody else can speak on any other thing from any other group, But at my core, I think, this is why it is so important to get people with lived experience in there, is because you recognise from your own life the importance of bringing those other voices in and making sure that the environment allows for that to happen and values that. And that's really what I'm hoping to do.
So you mentioned the importance of advocacy, and you've been involved in advocacy in WA for quite some time. For the people outside WA, you want to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that you've done over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, look, so I'm, again, my political nerdiness extends into committee nerdiness, as I'm sure a lot of people watching will be kind of familiar with this process of getting on boards and committees and doing a lot of work in that space. So I've been on the committee of management for people with disability WA for a couple of years and did a lot of work there. Also at the local government level, I'm lucky enough to live in a council with a disability access and inclusion reference group. So I've worked with them I was on there for about 5 years, I think. And one of the things that we were able to do was pass some of the highest access standards in the state in relation to accessible bathrooms, to make sure that they had proper changing facilities and things like that, because I'm not sure whether it's the case in the eastern states, but in WA there are very, very few actually kind of fully above standard kind of facilities and that kind of thing. So work to be there. The other one is around transport, where I've been very, very vocal on the inaccessible nature of public transport and the way that that feeds into isolation and exclusion. The built environment is in many ways a reflection of the societal preconceptions that go into those that build it, if you know what I mean. And so particularly in WA, we had a report released that at the current rate of upgrade, WA's bus stops wouldn't be fully up to accessible standards until I was 40 years old, which is not nearly good enough. And we have a whole problem in the transport space, which I bet my life isn't unique to WA, where the PTA or the transport authorities at the state level take care of the train stations and the bus stops, but local government is responsible for the connection of that network into the broader footpath network. And of course, if you don't have that, then you can't have kind of end-to-end access. That's before you even get into accessible buses and the high level of train stations that aren't accessible, which seems a bit nitty-gritty and kind of in the stuff. But the reality is, I had an experience in WA where I got out of the train station, which I wasn't expecting to. It's on one of our older lines that existed before we electrified. And got out of the train, and so there's a gap, but there's also a height difference. And so I just went straight out of the train, wheels went straight into the gap in the middle, couldn't go forward, couldn't go back, the doors started beeping and closing, had to jump out of and I'm lucky enough to be able to, I was able to jump out, kind of hit the ground, skin my knees, skin my hands, turn around, pull the chair up, get in the thing, go down the steep hill away from the station, because obviously you had to go back. And then halfway up the ramp on the other side, I went, I can't do this. And I had to wait 10 minutes for a cyclist to come and push me up. So these things seem trivial. Well, hopefully they don't seem trivial to you guys. More broadly, they can be considered a bit trivial, but they have real impacts in people's lives. And when you look at the social isolation statistics, the unemployment statistics, the built environment and its inaccessibility is at the heart of that.
I don't think that every Australian council supporters are going to think those kind of issues.
No.
It affects people's everyday lives. And so that's the kind of stuff that we have to tackle.
Absolutely, and not just people with a disability as well. Like, this is about building universal design into our communities so that older Australians can get around, so that mums with prams can get around. You know, it's not just a kind of niche disability thing. It's about inverting the kind of transport triangle from kind of cars, trucks, freight, and then maybe pedestrians, and then maybe bikes below that. To kind of flipping it on its head and making it so that everybody can access the community.
So you mentioned before, you are the youngest person to ever sit in the Senate, and you're also one of only a few people with disability to ever be elected to federal parliament, either upper or lower house. Can you tell us a little bit about why you think it's really important that people with disability sit in our federal parliament?
I think across the board, and it isn't. I mean, it isn't just exclusive to people with a disability. It goes for youth and gender diversity and racial background. I think our legislative processes are always strengthened when there are people from a diversity of backgrounds who contribute to that legislation, because then that legislation will reflect the broad kind of experiences of the Australian community, rather than just a kind of a niche there. And it's not to say that if you don't have these perspectives, you can't feel, can't work in the space. But at the end of the day, history has shown us time and time again that when it comes to societal change, we only really start to get cracking when people with lived experience, with skin in the game, get into chambers like this on behalf of the movements that brought them there and start doing the work. I think we see that if we look at workers' rights. I think we see that if we look at the civil rights movement in America. I think we see that if we look at the women's rights movement. You need people who, at the end of the day, if this legislation doesn't pass, will be materially affected by it themselves. And that's across the board. So I think that's why it's so valuable.
So have you got a message then, particularly for young people with a disability
Yes.
who might be out watching you this week? Have you got something that you want to say to them?
I would say to anybody, young or disabled or whatever, this place, which I'm now lucky enough to be in, is your house. It is the people's parliament. It is the place where the people's work should be done. It isn't always, and I have many concerns about that, but it bloody well should be. That's what it exists for. And so if you see a situation where you don't feel like your views are being represented, get informed, get involved, because your vote is powerful and your voice is so needed in this place. Politics is not something that should be done in the abstract. You send us here to do your work, and if we're not doing it, you should let us know. And that goes for me as well. And I would say that don't let anybody tell you that it isn't your place to be here, that you're too young, that you don't have enough experience, or that you aren't from the right background, or that you won't be able to participate in the process effectively because of your disability. That is, quite frankly, crap. We have as much right to be in this place as anybody, and we have as much of a contribution to make as well. So that's what I'd say.
Well, thank you, Jordon. I know you've been really busy this week. It has been a really big week in the Senate, so we really appreciate the fact that you've made this time for us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I wanted to let you know that if you check out on our Facebook page, there's lots and lots of messages of congratulations from all the Every Australian Counts supporters. So I promised that I would pass those on, but there's lots of people.
I've seen it.
And there's plenty of people to see.
I appreciate it tremendously. Thank everybody watching. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world, and I really do hope to be able to go forward and be an effective voice for our community.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Jordon.
Thanks so much, Christine. See ya.